Hello, welcome, Sophia.
Thank you
How are
very
you?
much. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good as well, thanks. Um, Before I forget it, could you maybe introduce yourself to the audience that maybe doesn't know you yet?
Sure. I'm a psychologist. I study radicalization, political violence, terrorism, all kinds of fun things like that. Um, I am officially affiliated with Georgia State University, but I also work with a number of other entities like the European Commission, the United Nations. Um, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is a for me this is a really special episode because this basically I started this series in response to most of the incel topic being covered from a perspective of radicalization and terrorism. And I basically danced around that topic for the last, I don't know how many streams I did on the topic yet. I think about 6 or 7. So I basically tried to avoid the topic because I think it's very sensationalized. So hopefully we can do a very, very boring stream about it. Trying to not sensationalize it as much as possible. Um, yeah, the first thing I I will start very boring. Let's talk about the definitions just to clear things up so we are really on the same page here. Maybe radical, terrorism or terrorist, incel, and then blackpill.
And what's the last one?
Blackpill.
Blackpill.
Yeah.
Okay, radicalization is easy. Radicalization is a psychological process that transitions a person toward greater acceptance of violence or illegal means in defense of or support for a cause or a group. Radicalization can happen in the realm of opinions and attitudes only. So you go from thinking that violence is not okay and illegal means of achieving something is not okay to thinking then no, it's okay or even it's required. That's radicalization of opinion. And sometimes radicalization can happen in action, connected to, but not necessarily connected to, opinions and attitudes. For example, if you are at a protest with somebody that you care very much about, and that person gets into a scuffle with the police, and you see the police brutally assaulting that person, in that moment, you can turn to radical action without really much change in attitude or opinion about whatever the protest is about. So radicalization can be an opinion or in action, but it's always a process of transitioning toward a greater acceptance of violence and illegal means for a group or a cause.
So
Then we have terrorism, which is actually really hard because it's a very politicized definition and there is no single agreed upon definition. Every entity, international entity and national entity, uses a slightly different version of it. The reason it's really politicized is that labeling somebody as a terrorist gives the government a lot of authority to do things to that person that they couldn't do if this person wasn't labeled a terrorist. So, one thing that a lot of these definitions of terrorism have in common is that the person or a group acts with an intent to terrorize, to scare, and to extract something as a result of that terror from another government or people. So it's rather inclusive, right? Like you can see how it can be shaped depending on what the goals of the government are. And we see, for example, some not so benevolent governments like the Russian government call Ukrainians terrorists for defending their own territory and trying them under that statute in their court of law. But like I said, the reason we see this is because it gives for example, the Russian government the power to do things to these Ukrainian captives that they wouldn't be able to do if they weren't labeled terrorists.
but this is Yeah, I'm okay with most of what you're saying. So just to recap it, radicalization is the amount, the extent to which I'm ready to break rules. Basically, it can be societal rules, it can also be laws and moral rules. So the amount, so the extent to which I'm willing to go for my ideology, is that what you would consider
I think
radical?
you're making it broader than I make it,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there are a lot of rules that, to my opinion, are not relevant. And if a person, whether a person breaks them or not, cheating on your taxes, okay, it's you know breaking a rule, but it's really not relevant to the phenomenon of radicalization, which basically, as a psychologist, we're looking at somebody crossing a line. And one of these lines is violence. For humans, it's a big line. It's hard for us to be okay with somebody being brutalized or killed. So, to get to the place where it's okay for us takes some psychological transitioning. And breaking laws, like January 6th, breaking into the Capitol building, um, even though the law is trespassing, is similarly significant in that a person crosses a significant boundary. So I think the rules of morality are kind of shifting. People used to think that being gay is immoral, and now they think that it's not, right. They used to think that interracial marriages were immoral, and now they're not. But I think violence is kind of a more stably prohibitive phenomenon, and accepting it is more predictably um, salient transition, which is what radicalization is. It's a transition to that.
I guess my goal is, when I try to define radicalism, I'm really trying to capture everything that I would also, in my the use of the word, also trying to get a precise definition while also capturing most of the general use of the public. So if I think about somebody where I'm thinking, wow, this guy became really radical, I'm thinking about also not only about someone who's breaking the law or committing violence, but also maybe getting into social conflict at work, or breaking some societal norms in order to, and maybe breaking up friendships and stuff like that, because of his ideology. And I feel like there I would even consider them someone who just informs themselves or just has an opinion is less radical than someone who's ready to break societal norms for that. So yeah, that's.
So I think it's okay to have different definitions, and like I
Mm-hmm.
just said, different government entities, even in the United States, have different definitions. The reason I think it's important for me to make clear what I mean is because when I refer to radicalization in the context of research and the theory that we have, that is what I'm talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
you may have a different opinion, and other people in the field that I am in may have different opinions. But I think it's important for me to make clear to your listening public what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for you, radicalization is something where, after a certain threshold, you can say that somebody is radicalized, and it's not like a completely gradual shift from, but it is like a certain boundary. Once the certain boundary of violence is crossed, then you can say that somebody is radicalized. Is that like, where is the?
No, there's
Yeah.
no such thing as somebody is radicalized. I think it's so okay. Two things. One is radicalization can be very sudden. It can happen like that, and I kind of gave an example of that, right? And it can be very gradual. And one is not any less of radicalization than another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hard to say this person is radicalized or not. When we say that somebody is a terrorist, we typically mean, indicted for terrorism, convicted for terrorism, labeled as a member of a terrorist group, so by somebody else, right? But as a psychological process, the thing is, most of us at some point, had radical ideas and radical thoughts, and even about people who cut us off in traffic, sometimes you want to kill them, right? So at least in opinion, we all can be to some degree radical. And there's no, like final destination. So even if somebody was a terrorist, it doesn't mean that they can then go back to disavowing the group and the ideology, and in fact becoming very vocally against violence in the name of it, right? So, like I said, radicalization is kind of a psychological process, and at any given moment you can be in a different point on a scale, and what puts you higher or lower on the scale of radicalization can be a whole bunch of different things. And even if you reached the very end of the scale at one point, doesn't mean that you will stay there, and vice versa. Even if you're on the lowest end of the scale, doesn't mean that you're never going to be going up.
I, I will sprinkle in some naive layman's questions about your profession, okay? So is this also something, so right now we're basically having two definitions. My definition is breaking societal norms as a gradual process, and your definition is basically readiness to violence, right?
Acceptance of violence.
Yes. So there is also a gradual, I misunderstood you before. There is no threshold. It's a gradual process into accepting, being in favor of, and then at the end executing or acting upon violence. So now we have basically two competing definitions. And is that also something that happens in your field? Because I mean, you have important work on the radicalization scale. You basically invented it, right? You created this scale, but I mean, the most important thing is, in order to check the validity of your scale, would be to be in accordance about the definition. So is that something that you have to deal with to find out which definition is the best, and how do you find out which definition is the best?
Right, there has to be some validity to a definition. So one thing is face validity. So we can determine some face validity just in a conversation. For example, you tell me, I think this is radicalization. I'm going to say, no, it's not, because no, person who was ever considered radical ever did this. And we can kind of decide that between the two of us. But usually in the research field, face validity is not enough. So you also have to determine some external validity and discriminant validity, which means, for example, that if I believe that this is what radicalization is, then groups or individuals who are known radicals, who are members of, for example, radical movements or terrorist groups, should adhere to my definition. And if they don't, that means my definition is wrong, because we know for a fact from their actions that they're radically determined individuals, right?
Wait, we don't know that. How do we know that they're radical individuals if we haven't decided on what radical means?
Well, if they're terrorists, if we look at convicted terrorists, then terrorism is kind of the culmination of the process of radicalization, when you in fact commit violence, not just support violence, not just materially support violence, not just participate in a group, but you actually commit violence to advance your group or cause, right? So if we look at terrorist groups or terrorist individuals, we should find kind of evidence of the definition being the case for this person or this group.
But sorry, that was actually, it's a point on my list. Is terrorism the ultimate radicalism? And I think it's not, especially when we think about a lot of the terrorism that we have in the world is, I mean, we can talk about that. But that's also up for discussion, I think. Would you like to go into that? Would you like to unpack that? If
unpack what?
If terrorism is the ultimate radicalism?
In my definition, yeah, it's kind of the culmination of the radicalizing trajectory.
But if we are testing your definition by that, we can't use your definition in order to determine that, right? We are in the process of testing your definition. You said that we find the validity of your definition, how good your definition is, we can find out by looking at extreme examples of that, right? Mm-hmm. And yes. If you're now saying that terrorism is the edge case, I mean the ultimate example of that, by your definition, then we basically circled around back to your definition, which we are trying to validate right now, right?
I don't understand that last part.
Okay.
So the definition is divorced from I don't define who terrorist is. The government does, right? So
yes.
Whether a group is a terrorist or a person is a terrorist is the work that government prosecutors do when they identify a person and link them to a particular act of violence or link a group. So I don't
For now,
do
we
that
agree on what.
work.
Yeah.
I piggyback on that work to
Yes.
say, does that then mean that this person is also radical, that they embrace violence in support of their group or a cause?
So you have a definition. You try to find out how good it is. In order to find that out, you go look at an edge case. You look at a really extreme case where you think you know that it's radicalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in order to find out how your definition is, but if that is really an edge case depends on the definition, which you are trying to validate. You're trying to find out how good that is, right? You're trying to find out.
No, it doesn't depend on my definition. It depends on government convictions.
Let's say you have a detector of something, of objects, okay, of object X, and you're trying to find out how good this object is, of how good this detector is. You can't use something that you found. You can't use an example of something that you found with that detector, right?
No, you're confusing two things.
Mm-hmm.
One is what somebody has done in the world, a physical act that somebody has done. The other is a psychological thing that happens in their mind, right? I am interested in the second. The government is interested in the first. The question is how much they overlap.
How do you know that terrorists are a good edge case, are an extreme case of radicalism? If you don't know what radicalism is, if
I
you're different.
don't. I no. I it takes me asking them questions that are consistent with the definition to determine whether having been part of a radical organization or having committed an act of political violence is consistent with them answering questions about radicalization in a way of agreement with it that is supportive of the definition.
Mm-hmm. Do you recognize the problem I have? That there is no basis other than your definition to defend your definition, so that we always circle back around into your definition. Because
No, I disagree with you. I think the definition has to do with the psychological process inside somebody's head. Okay? There are people who commit violence for a variety of reasons that have no radicalization at all. They beat up their wife because their mothers didn't raise them right, or they got drunk and, when they get drunk, they become violent. A bunch of reasons people commit violence. Out of all people who commit violence, some do it for the reason of their radicalization. And at the same time, there are people who never commit violence, but who can be quite psychologically radical, even though they don't commit, they support groups that do it. They, express this support in some number of ways, either by, participating in the group's online chats or donating money to an organization or expressing this support to other people. So I am interested in those individuals who are radical, whether or not they committed violence and whether or not, they have other attitudes. I'm just interested in radicalization.
I understand, but the problem is we don't know yet what that is. If it's my definition or if it's your definition. If my definition is better or your definition or somebody else's, right?
No, you can create. No, the reason the way to determine that is empirically. You create a scale
Yeah.
that adheres to your definition, but
Mm-hmm.
not my definition. That's
Mm-hmm.
called discriminant validity testing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you ask all these kinds of different groups of people
Mm-hmm.
that committed violent action that was related to political ideas or beliefs, or committed violent action that wasn't, that didn't commit any violent action, but they have some political beliefs that are radical, and you see whether your scale describes better people who you believe are radical, if it captures more variance in the data, that's a statistical analysis, than does my scale. So external validity is what I did. What you need to do if you want to determine whether your definition is better than mine is to do tests of discriminant validity.
Mm-hmm. But the more narrow my definition is, the better it will be your results, right? The less people.
I don't know. It depends on the phenomenon. Like the phenomenon can be very easy to define. Like if somebody has sickle cell anemia,
Hmm.
it's a very,
What's that?
narrow, it's a disease that's carried by just one gene, and it's a very, narrowly presenting phenomenon, both biologically and clinically. So if you can create criteria for testing that just pick out the people, you will be okay. You're not going to have any false positives or false negatives. However, psychological things are not as easy as physical things or biological things. And very often, if we think that we have a phenomenon all figured out and we can really go into the wild and pick out, through the rifle of our definition and measurements, the individual or group who fits it, the phenomenon may change, which it has changed, for example, since I started studying it. The people who are radical right now are nothing like the people who were radical after 9/11. And the approaches and measurements that we started with are very largely kind of missing out on a whole lot of population that we should be looking at. Such as, for example, incels, which is where we started, or I mean, almost started.
So just for the record, so your answer is, and I can live with that answer. I will have to think about it a little bit. But your answer is basically the if you have one definition and the other definition, and we both do basically a scale based upon that definition, by asking questions that would fit that definition, right? And the better results, the more clear results we get from that, the better our definition is. That would be the answer, right?
At least for now. At least for now.
Okay. Let's talk about the correlation between first between ideology and radical acts. I read through 2 of your papers on the topic, and please maybe just you can talk about it better than I can. So maybe you can tell us what you found out about the relationship between ideology and.
So I think stemming in large part from the government definitions, but also layman's understanding of psychology, people tend to almost equate radicalization and ideology. And certainly, again, when the field that I'm in, the field of research of radicalization and terrorism, which it existed before 9/11, but after 9/11 is really when it took off. Like we produced 800% the number of publications after 9/11 than we did in all of our years before. So after 9/11, we collectively saw terrorism as Islamic terrorism. Understandably, right? That was the most salient example. That was the example that the government wanted us to understand. And so, it kind of went hand in hand, ideology and radicalization. However, the question of chicken and egg, if you will, always remained. And 20 plus years after 9/11, we have accumulated enough data in all kinds of forms, case studies, interviews, survey data, that suggest that ideology tends to be a symptom of radicalization, but not really its cause. In other words, people who become terrorists, who join terrorist groups, they tend to absorb ideology of the group that they belong or the movement that they want to belong to, as they become progressively more radicalized. So if we're talking about Islamic...
Wait, sorry. I have a question. I'm sorry that I'm cutting you off, but I have to. So ideology is a symptom of radicalization. But isn't radicalization by definition, don't you need an ideology in order to be radical? Or can you be radical without having an ideology?
You do kind of need an ideology, but it doesn't mean that that's what makes you radical. So you also need a gun, or a bomb, or a knife to become a terrorist. It doesn't mean that either one of those things is what made you a terrorist.
But how is it a symptom? Yeah, but how is ideology a symptom of radicalization?
Because individuals who become radicalized into terrorism tend to absorb ideology of the movement as they become progressively more radicalized, which is different than if, for example, they opened the Quran, read through it, closed it, and said, "That's it. I'm going to go and kill, in the name of Islam." It doesn't happen like that. It takes something else. In some cases, it takes a charismatic leader. Osama bin Laden was a charismatic leader. There's some charismatic Islamic clerics like Anwar al-Awlaki, who seems to have radicalized a lot of individuals who were already on that path. Sometimes it takes a membership in a group that is already radicalized. So if a group takes you in, like a lot of religious cults, seek out individuals who are kind of lost. They actually go to train stations and look for people who look forlorn, like they haven't showered in a few days. And they take them in and they offer them a warm place to sleep and food and companionship. And people that this happens to very often end up very strong supporters of the cult's ideology, not because they were ideologically headed that way, but the membership in the group was the medium that allowed that ideology to flourish in the individual. And the same way, for example, as the 9/11 attackers were, a very tight-knit group of immigrants, Muslim men in Germany, and they became radicalized together. I mean, they weren't radical up until that point. There's no indication that any of the 9/11 attackers had very radical ideas before they got together and started thinking together and talking together, which is actually a very powerful medium of radicalization. There's this process we know in psychology from experimental research that when groups get together and they spend a lot of time in discussion, the tendency is for them to become more polarized. So whatever direction the group was slightly leaning in before, if it was a little conservative, it will become a lot more conservative as a result of discussion. If it's a little bit liberal, it will become a lot more liberal as a result of discussion. It's just a psychological tendency that group discussions have, is to make people more radical in their opinions. Sometimes radicalization is really kind of not related to ideology at all. Sometimes it's an individual who is extremely hungry for power and who enjoys hurting people. So, for example,
So I feel like that's fake radicalization, right? That's like not really radicalization, because the way we defined radicalization is to do it for your beliefs, right? So one of the questions I remember you asked was the one where it was basically, it was the one about if would you give water to people that would stand in line to vote, right? Was that from your paper?
I never use that example.
Oh, really? Then I maybe
And I
read it
wouldn't
in
use that
another paper.
example because I don't think giving water is breaking any laws or committing violence. So I don't know
No,
how I.
in that example, it was set up such that it was. So
I never
imagine.
use that.
Okay, what would you use as a test question for determining if somebody is radical, for example? Can you give just a?
Yeah, so I have four questions that
Mhm.
assess radicalization. I don't know if I can remember them all, but one is: would you continue to support a group or a cause even if you knew that they resorted to violence?
Mhm.
That's one. Would you join a protest or a rally even if you knew that protest was likely to turn violent?
Mhm.
Um, would you attack police or security forces if you saw them attacking your group or your cause? And I
Mhm.
forget what the fourth one was.
Mhm. But basically, with all of those examples, the implication is that they believe in the cause, right? So there is never.
I didn't make that implication.
It
I
is
did not make that implication. My
okay.
definition has nothing to say about beliefs.
By the way, I'm
I'll repeat
sorry.
it for you if you'd like, but I just want to be very clear. The definition is that radicalization is a process by which an individual or a group
Mhm.
move progressively toward accepting violence in the name of a group or a cause. So
Mhm.
a group can be anything. It could be your nation, it could be your ethnic group, your religious group, it could be, I don't know, your village, right? Your family, even. And a cause, again, can be anything. It could be the environment, it can be
Could
I
it
don't know.
be the mafia? Could it be just
Of
criminals?
course, yes,
Really?
radicalization is
Oh,
not,
okay. Okay.
of
I didn't know
course.
that. Okay.
Yeah. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, the founding fathers, um, by today's standards, and the US government is on record as saying that, today they would be classified as violent radicals.
Wait, but the founding
So
fathers, they have an ideology, and now I would like to know if
they
would you
can
say
have
that
an
Al
ideology, but it's
Capone
not a defining factor. So,
was
I mean, an ideology is fine, but it's not what makes or breaks. So, people who were fighting for Al Qaeda,
Mhm.
you know, shared a lot of ideology with very peaceful Muslims.
Mhm.
That's not what made them terrorists.
Yeah,
Not
but
not beliefs.
it's not a sufficient reason, but it's a necessary reason. That's what I'm saying.
No, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay, you're
I'm
saying it's
I'm
not
not ready to
necessary.
say that
Okay,
it's necessary.
I thought it was necessary for because I feel like it's a weird. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like it's weird to think about Al Capone as somebody who's radical or radicalized. I don't know. Maybe it is. I just was under the
It's
assumption
just
that.
an attitude toward violence as means, is
Okay.
attitude and your willingness to use violence as means.
Mhm.
So, for example, any soldiers, are necessarily radicalized. People, for example, in the US, where it's 100% volunteer military force, when they join the army, they typically have no experience with violence, because if you have a criminal record, they will not let you in. Okay? So to get from that point where they're just young kids with very little experience of anything, and certainly very little experience of violence, if any, to get them to a point where they're ready and willing to kill without a moment's hesitation, the army has to put them through a lot of training where they get desensitized to violence, they change their priority, they change their idea of themselves, right? Like, it's a whole process. I have a paper about it, and many people have written on it. So any military person who is readying for conflict is going through a process of radicalization. Radicalization is not unique to terrorism. It's not necessarily bad. Sometimes it's every revolution in history, including the American Revolution and the French
Then
Revolution,
would
was
you
committed by radical individuals and groups.
Okay, the reason maybe why I think somebody needs to be radical, needs an ideology in order to be radical. I'm not saying it's a sufficient reason. I'm not saying everyone who has a strong ideology is necessarily radical. I'm just saying that radical ideology is, to me, kind of intuitively. Now I'm overthinking it, but normally intuitively, ideology is necessary in order for radicalism to happen, in my opinion. Because for me, for example, it's a big difference between a soldier that is just doing his duty, or just doing like what he's being told to do, because of, I don't know, anxiety, being scared of disobedience, or even wanting to make money. I feel like is not really the same thing as a person that is like after 9/11 saying, okay, I have to go to Afghanistan, I have to kill some shoot up some Muslims.
I understand it's your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
However, the data we have show that a whole lot of bona fide terrorists and radical individuals do it for reasons that have nothing to do with ideology. For example, people in
Mm-hmm.
Iraq who planted improvised explosive devices. Vast majority, we have those people arrested and interviewed, and what they say is, sometimes they say, is the only way to make money for me. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing it. I don't care if I blow up some Americans, as long as I
Mm-hmm.
can make a buck. And sometimes they say, it's fun, explosions and weapons are fun. And young men, especially, at a particular age and at particular social economic status, are very eager to engage with groups or opportunities that bring them closer to the power and status that guns and explosives bring.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole lot of, really good research, and most of it is not mine, but I encourage you to if you're interested, to look at that suggests that people become terrorists and embrace violence in the name of whatever, for reasons that have very little to do with ideology, at least at first. Once you're, shooting and blowing up people for a while as a member of a radical group, chances are good that you're going to be able to spew that ideology. However, even then, so, if you, I have a colleague at the UN who worked at detention camps where they
Mhm.
in Iraq, where they held actual terrorists, and he tells me, as well as some people who wrote books about it, that these people know very little of Islam. They can't
Mhm.
identify prominent Al Qaeda leaders or ISIS leaders. They're extremely ignorant. So, a well educated liberal arts person in the US might know more about the
Mhm.
pillars of Islam than these
Mhm.
individuals who kill for something that they believe in is in the name of it. So I understand it's your opinion. I encourage you to look a little deeper into the data.
No, I agree. I agree that there is no positive correlation between amount of ideal. How do you say it? Ideologization. I don't know. And radicalization. So it's not like the more you get into the religion or belief system, the more you get radicalized. That I also read in your paper about that, and that was actually the main point I want to get to. But at the same time, I feel like it's even in really small doses, it's kind of the bedrock on which the whole self justification
So,
works. A lot of it.
look, sorry to get nitty gritty about it,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a positive correlation. Just because there is no, uh, what I was talking about is that there is no causation. So correlation and causation are different
Mm-hmm.
things. As I said, an individual who is part of a radical group is going to absorb that ideology. So you're going to get a positive correlation. It's not, it's not going to be zero. It's not going to
Mm-hmm.
be negative for
Oh, really?
sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah, if you
Mm-hmm.
just imagine the population of all the people who are
Mm-hmm.
part of radical groups,
Mm-hmm.
of them, a certain proportion are going to support the ideology of that group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And on the other hand, people who don't support the ideology of that group are not going to be killing for that ideology. So there's going to be a positive correlation. It's not going to be 1-to-1, because a lot of people
Okay.
who
Mm-hmm.
support that ideology are not going to be terrorists,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people who are terrorists are not of that ideology. But there's going to be a positive correlation. I was talking about causation, meaning how do people become radicalized? And I was saying that the data we have does not support a causal relationship between ideology and radical action.
Layman's question time. So the more somebody is into a certain ideology, the higher the probability that he's gonna be more radical. Isn't
No,
that what correlation means?
the more somebody is radical, the more likely it's going to be that they absorb that ideology. But you have, like, for example, Salafi, uh, people who believe in Salafi Islam, they're extremely, extremely into that ideology. They can recite the Quran from
Mm-hmm.
any place, unlike the terrorists in the camps that I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about, right? And they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They actually believe in, like, kind of a passive and peaceful existence, right? So it's not that that's going to give you positive correlation. It's the
Mm-hmm.
people who are radical are going to be more likely to people who are terrorists are going to be more likely to be radical. That's going to get you the positive correlation.
Mm-hmm. Isn't positive correlation just the x-axis amount of radicalization and y-axis amount of ideology that they're basically subscribing to, and the correlation would be a straight line, basically dots that form a
The
straight line.
correlation is the slope of the best fit line across all the data points, and each data point is an individual's
Yeah.
ideological belief crossed with their support of violence, in my definition, in defense or support of a group or a cause.
So if I have that straight line, basically, if I can draw this cluster, then basically I have a
So
correlation, right?
a correlation is a slope of the line. A line can be flat, that's a zero correlation. And line
Yeah.
can also be
Positively
inverted like that. That's a
correlated,
negative
negative correlation,
A
yes.
positive correlation is the one that goes from the corner of the
Yes.
axis kind of
Yes.
up, right?
X
But
equals Y.
again, it could be very, very steep slope. That's a very strong positive correlation. It could be very, very, tiny incline,
Sure.
which is also a positive correlation. And I'm saying that what you're likely to find is a slope that's kind of not very much inclined.
Okay, it's not significant.
It's positive.
It's not significant. Is that what you're saying?
No, significant is a complete different thing.
Okay.
Okay.
So
I wasn't realizing that this was going to be like a beginner's, introductory session
that. Yeah,
to
it will be.
statistics and psychology and everything else.
Yeah, so is it?
Significance is determined by a number of other things, including, for example, how many individuals are in your graph. So if we have 5 individuals, then it's very hard to get a statistically significant correlation, even if your line is going straight to the sky.
Okay, let's say we do.
Significance takes into account statistically how many people are in your sample. So the more people in your sample, the easier it is to get a significant result. For example, if my sample is 200 people, I probably need a correlation of 0.25, I want to say, for it to reach significance of 0.05. But if I have a sample of 2,500, I can get a correlation of half that size. And remember, the correlation is the slope of the line. So the line has to go half as steeply for it to count as significant. So don't worry. I mean, we can't have this conversation without actual data, because, data have characteristics that we can't just, think up on a fly.
But you have the data, right?
I have different kinds of data. I have 20 years of data, but if you're talking about in general, then nobody has those data.
So
because of course, nobody has information about all the terrorists. And
then I'm going to ask you even more stupid of a question. So if I see somebody getting higher and higher in his ideology, amount of ideology is increasing more and more. Should I be worried that is it very likely that that person is going to get radicalized more and more as well?
See, this is very great, very good that we had the conversation we had a second ago, because it very much depends on what ideology you're talking about. Okay, so for example, for the past 5 years, I've been studying QAnon. QAnon is a collection of people numbering in the US somewhere between 15 million and 45 million. We don't know exactly, but it's a huge number of people who believe in conspiracy theories, the central of which is that there is a cabal of Satan worshipping pedophiles who have taken over the US government and the media, who are actively kidnapping children to torture and sexually abuse them and to harvest their blood for adrenochrome, which is a substance they believe is secreted when the child is tortured, and then they consume it, and that gives them vitality and whatever. So these people believe a bunch of other things, like that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, which is why a lot of them participated in the January 6th insurrection. And so I have a lot of data on people who believe these things. This is an ideology that originally the FBI was really concerned about. They issued a warning and labeled QAnon as a rising threat. They labeled it as a terrorism threat. A number of people, not a large number, but several people have been prosecuted with a terrorism bump in indictments and convictions, who were of the QAnon persuasion. But with the data that I have, which is thousands of people, believers, I am very confident in saying that more commitment to the ideology makes you actually less likely to act on it.
Wait, that's what I said. That's what I said in the beginning. I said,
no, you said, should I be concerned that if somebody becomes more ideologically committed, that they would become more radical? And I said to you just now in response to that it depends on the ideology. Because, for example, with QAnon, becoming more ideologically steeped makes you less likely to be engaged in any actual violence.
But only for QAnon, right? And you can't say that in general.
Not only for QAnon.
For example,
I'm sorry, what did you say?
But you can't say that about in general about ideology and radicalization
You can't say anything in general
broadly?
about radicalization because they're vastly different
Hmm.
groups whose ideologies are almost orthogonal to one another. So of course, there's no one thing that can be said about all of them. And the reason I am sticking to my guns about the definition and the measure I use is because it is generally enough on the level of human psychology that I don't get into the nitty gritty of what it is that you believe in. I don't care what you believe in. I just
Hmm.
care about whether or not you support violence in defense
Hmm.
of whatever. Yeah. So it's true of QAnon that more ideology means less actual
Hmm.
radicalization. Uh, in my research on incels, it's also the result I find among incels. So
Okay.
individuals who are more committed to the black pill ideology and more committed to the whole belief system of inceldom are actually scoring significantly lower on the radicalization scale than people who believe it less.
Hmm.
Okay.
Since we are basically already there, let's talk about it. Like all of this, what we're basically talking about in the context of incels. Uh, you've already said it. The more black pill someone is, it's not doesn't mean at all that it's is going to be more prone to violence. Um, what about the terrorism designation for incels?
Well, it's only Canada, according to my knowledge. I may be outdated, and somebody just issued something that I haven't caught up with. But it's only Canada that issued that designation. Am I wrong about that? Correct me if
I
I'm wrong.
also only heard about Canada, to be honest.
Yeah. So I again, there are people who know more about incels as such. I'm not a political scientist. I'm a psychologist, right? So I'm interested in humans and what makes them move and what makes them do things. Um, However, when I became interested in this phenomenon, it was because my colleagues were talking about it as the new emerging threat, like QAnon. Like the sky is falling. This is what's going to get us, and you have to admit the rhetoric is quite disturbing on incel forums, and of course the manifestos that were produced by the notorious incels who mass murdered a bunch of people. So I became genuinely interested in this new phenomenon of an online community that exists around a set of beliefs. So this is kind of a new thing in radicalization, right? We didn't used to have this. Terrorism used to be, and radicalization used to be um, a phenomenon of small face-to-face groups like the 9/11 bombers, but every other group until then, it's these people, they get together, they go underground together, they become really mutually dependent on each other, and they develop jointly this radical agenda, and then they act on it. And nowadays, with the proliferation of internet and social media, um, it allowed for something completely new to evolve. One of which was QAnon, and the other of which was incels, which is people from different continents, or who've never met each other, may not even know each other's real names. They find each other based on some shared fears or beliefs or ideas, and they interact almost entirely online. I'm talking about, you know, QAnon incels are even more exclusively online based groups. And in the case of incels, the beliefs are that the feminist movement and kind of the modern society has left a lot of men behind and unable to find a female companion for romantic relationships, and they feel that there is an unfair preference for good-looking men that women have, and that the society as a whole has. So it gives advantage to men who have certain facial features, certain body features, and that it disadvantages men who don't, which they themselves believe to be these disadvantaged men. And by the way, this is what in my field we call this a grievance, right? So the belief that somebody wronged us or me, group grievance or individual grievance or both. And the black pill idea, this whole pill vocabulary comes from, of course, the Matrix, which is another thing that QAnon and incels share, is the reference to the Matrix scene where Neo, the main character, is invited by this charismatic, leader Morpheus to choose either to take a red pill that's gonna expose the truth of the world to him, whatever the consequences, or take the blue pill and go back to the illusion that he was living in. So, being red pilled means to have had your eyes open to the reality of the world, which for incels, that reality is that the society is prejudiced against this kind of men that they are, and that women are unfair to them, and that they have been left behind. And then there is a spin on it that suggests that the only way to remedy this situation, to avenge this grievance, is to violently take over the current social order through an incel uprising, and kind of distribute all the women fairly, so that every man, including incels, would have a girlfriend or a female companion.
I'm not sure. You maybe know better than me how much of. I mean, at the end of the day, terrorism is igniting fear to get your means, uh, to get what you want, basically, because you're not able to directly force somebody. You can only do it by creating fear and by creating pressure from the violence that you do. That somehow sounds like what these perpetrators were doing, right? I mean, they were trying to change. They were not able to get what they want, so they were instigating direct violence to make people stop living in their good world, right? To basically, I mean, they were angry. There is a big anger towards normies that basically this unjust society, this society that makes them suffer so much, that they are supporting it by not helping them, by not making a change. And that's kind of also the idea behind Islamic terrorism, where you say, okay, we're going to bomb the Twin Towers because as American voters, you are able to change the politics of the US, and you are basically, it's your government, your tax money, you're basically upholding that society to a certain extent, right?
You are right about that. I'm not sure who you're talking about when you say perpetrators. Do you mean the actual
I,
incels who committed
I try,
mass
yeah,
violence?
I try not to use their names because I think that's not good to do so.
Right, but I
So
think it's important to recognize that they were very few individuals, right? Out of a group that numbers, I mean, it's hard to count, but some people did, and it's something like tens of thousands around the world, right? And the question is, how many of those who call themselves incels and who participate in some of these discussions share the beliefs that propelled the mass violence of these individuals who are notorious for it? And in my research, it's most of individuals who identify as incels and support the ideology absolutely do not admire these individuals and don't think that their idea of what to do was the right idea.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that incels have nothing to do with these acts, like very very
So
little to do.
there's a difference between designating the whole thing as a terrorist organization. Like Al Qaeda was a terrorist
Yeah.
organization that existed for the sole purpose of carrying out actions against the U.S. government, Western government, and its proxies that were violent and destructive. Right. The question is whether that designation applies just as well to incels as a group, and my contention is that it doesn't.
I agree.
So
I
You
agree. I
know,
just
there are a number of Americans, who have committed horrific actions. Does it mean that America is a what do you call it, state that sponsors terrorism? And my contention is that you cannot judge, the entirety of the group based on a few individuals, especially if we have data that show that most people in the group do not support those individuals.
yes, I agree 100%. But there was this one quote from your paper I wrote down. That the justification for it not being terrorism was that it was instead labeled a hate crime, as far as I can remember. And I don't really agree, because I feel like it is an act of terrorism, but it doesn't mean that incels are a terrorist organization, or that. But I still would label those acts terroristic acts. I don't know.
I
Would you
mean,
disagree?
this is now, we're into the legal definitions, and I said up front that those are very strategic. Like, for example, in the US, you can't be charged with terrorism if you're a domestic actor. So if you go and blow up a synagogue because of your beliefs, anti-Semitic beliefs, or if you go and shoot up a mosque because of your anti-Islamic beliefs, you're going to be charged with hate crimes, not terrorism, because of how definitions in the US work. So I think I would rather not step into the, it's not my
Sure.
forte or
Hmm.
my expertise.
Sure. What do you? One other thing that you talk about a lot is martyrdom, and I was a little bit. You explicitly state that both the acts committed by incels and also Islamic terrorism, so suicide bombers, are by definition not martyrs. And I have a big. I don't, because the reason why you say that is because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because harm is being done to others, and
Yeah, because it's an
that
act of violence. It's an
yeah,
act of violence. So a martyrdom is an act of self-sacrifice
yeah.
that is stripped of any violence, either initial violence that results in the martyrdom, or violence in response. Um, I mean, it's a semantic question, but it's also a psychological question. So semantically, you can define it however you want, and I can define it however I want. However, psychologically, there's a particular power that a true martyr has over observers, a power that cannot be matched by a hero, which, I mean, if I were supporting, the cause of Islamic terrorists, I would grant them the nomenclature of heroes, but not martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
And psychologically, it's a matter of interpretation. So you are a witness to an act, whether you witness it first person or you witness it as a video on an internet, or you're witnessing it by reading, about it. You are perceiving a situation and a person acting in that situation. And when a martyr, like, the model of martyrdom of the Western civilization is that of Jesus. We don't have to agree on anything, but that I am very adamant about. Up until Jesus, there was no pure martyrdom in that form. He is the innovator of that strategy, if you will. And since then, many other people replicated it. So Gandhi was one of them, and he, in his memoirs, explicitly says that he was inspired by Jesus's model of martyrdom. Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, as well as, of course, every Christian saint that the Catholics, for example, worship, and so on. And here's the thing: you're a latecomer to a conflict. You haven't been there for years or days or minutes even of what happened before this. And you witness something between two parties, okay, in which one of the parties suffers and dies, okay? The question is of interpretation. if there is any violence on the part of the martyr, then you could conceivably interpret their death, their suffering, as punishment, as retribution, as fair play, as justice. And detractors will certainly do that. However, if a martyr is completely nonviolent and, you know, it's only one side that is inflicting suffering and pain and ultimately death on the person or a group of people, can be a group of people, then there is no other way to interpret it than to say that one side is evil, because this is what evil is hurting the innocent, and the other side is representing something that is quite good in human understanding, because innocence is kind of in the same semantic space as goodness. And that, for example, is probably why, Gandhi was so effective, and probably why peaceful protests are a lot more effective in turning public opinion than our violent protests, which is what's happening now with the protests in support of Palestinians. Public opinion is turning against them because of some well-publicized instances where there was mutual violence between campus security and the protesters. I'm not making a judgment on any of it. I'm just saying there's a psychology that goes into it that gives a huge benefit in interpreting the martyr's cause as benevolent and their oppressor's cause as evil, when the martyr is abstaining from any kind of violence or aggression. That is probably why the war in Ukraine, which most people around the world knew very little of anything about the situation in Ukraine and Russia. But when the war started, there was this overwhelming support for Ukraine by people who didn't know the first thing about it. And probably the reason is the interpretation was easy. Ukraine did not prepare for the war, for better or for worse. Again, not making a judgment, but they were quite innocent. They were attacked by a much stronger opponent for no discernible reason, just for being.
So Ukrainian that takes a weapon and goes to war is not a martyr if he dies.
No,
okay.
Not a martyr.
He's a
hero, maybe.
Hero. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Then I think that's kind of consistent. I again, it's a little bit in opposite to what I would consider a martyr. Maybe it's because of my social background, or I don't know. It's just okay. But
yeah, it's a very Christian idea, but as a psychological strategy, again, we don't have to agree on Christian ideas, but
sure,
as a psychological strategy, it's extremely powerful. And if you're interested, by the way, I wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah, I started it.
The Moral Murder. Yeah. So I think it's my best work to date. So I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the? I think one big problem is that we glorify. Okay, then let's talk about heroes. That's okay. Also fine, because one problem I have is that we can never know if it's a hero. Is it a hero, or is it a suicide bomber, or is it a terrorist, or what it is? It's not that we can make objective calls on that, and maybe we should not. We should just stop celebrating heroes. Maybe that would be.
I think we need heroes, right? I think there's a proverbial
violent
thing
heroes.
That one person's suicide bomber is another person's hero, right?
Yes.
So depending on your convictions and what side you are, of course, somebody fighting for you and your interests is going to be your hero, and somebody fighting against you and against your interests is not going to be your hero. Personally, there's a lot of gray area for me, and I don't know that it works for everybody. Probably no, it definitely doesn't work for everybody, but I think for me, violence is the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is an easy distinction to make, and I'm Ukrainian, so I grew up there. A lot of
Mm.
my really, really close friends are fighting in the front lines, and I worry about them and I send them good wishes every day. But um, I also know that even doing violence for something as intuitively simple as, you know, protecting your family, protecting your home, protecting your village, your town, right? It still changes a person. It changes a person in a way that's a little bit scary, you know, which is why our returning veterans in the US have a
Mhm.
much higher rate of radical actions, and, you know, why these militant right wing groups are specifically recruiting them from the population of veterans. Because once you have crossed that line, you are just different. You are a lot more okay with doing it, you know, again and for a different
So
reason. It's just a line that, you know, I don't know. It's a
so
very strong psychological barrier.
maybe we should. I mean, as hard as it is, the problem is you are probably now celebrating people that are defending Ukraine, and let's say that we know objectively from our perspective it is a good cause, and but then that also just, I mean, I'm always thinking about all the people that are using the Holocaust to resistance against Hitler to in order to justify what they're doing, right? So in many scenarios you're like, okay, don't do that, don't attack public buildings, don't, I don't know, like don't engage in terrorism, don't do this, don't do that, and you can always say, okay, but if under Hitler you would be okay with it, right? If we would have a fascist government and blah blah blah, and we have that right now, so I have to do it, right? So partly they're taking their justification from righteous resistance, and the reason for that is also that because that we are uh, celebrating resistance against Hitler because we don't like Hitler, right?
I mean, I thought we didn't like Hitler, and now it turns out it has to be litigated all over again because a bunch of people really like Hitler, you know?
Wait, we don't like. Okay, me and you, we can agree we don't like Hitler,
Yes, I
and that's
don't like
why.
Hitler.
And that's why,
Yeah.
yeah, and I also don't like Hitler, but
Good.
that's why,
Okay.
that's why uh, we are celebrating people that were in the resistance at the time against Hitler. But maybe that's not a good signal to send. Maybe it would be good to not celebrate that, to not have movies like, I don't know, like Inglorious Bastards or something like that, where basically violence against Hitler is being uh, celebrated. Maybe at least we can say, okay, we like the cause, but the means were still not good.
Yeah, so in the book on martyrdom, I have a chapter, you know, Dostoevsky is like probably the best psychologist to read on any of this. Like he already
Mhm.
thought about it all and he had really good,
Which
really colorful
which book are you
cases.
thinking about?
So Crime and Punishment,
Uh huh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The main character,
Mm-hmm. Raskolnikov.
Raskolnikov, he is a very intellectual, very deep thinking,
Mm-hmm.
kind of trying to do, you know, right, to make the world better. He wants to make the world better. And the world is so bad. Everywhere he looks, you know, Russia is really good for really feeling it, right? Like it's unjust. The good people suffer, the bad people prosper. And he decides to take it upon himself, you know, like you said today, people want to fight against all things evil, right? Because Hitler is evil. So when you say it's just like Hitler, you're saying it's evil and I want to fight against. So he decides to fight against evil. And, you know, in his case, you know, evil lives right next door. This old lady who's a broker who's, you know, cheats her customers and makes them go broke and die of hunger and stuff like that. He decides to kill this woman and take the gold from her and give it to her like the Robin Hood, you know? And the whole book is a case study of what happens, what kinds of transitions psychologically he has to go through, but also the fact that Dostoevsky was genius enough to see, and you know, I as a psychologist who does research on this can confirm, is that you can't wield evil as a weapon without becoming its weapon yourself. So he goes to kill this woman, and on the way out, he encounters her mentally retarded sister, who's also abused by this woman. and he ends up killing this poor innocent, completely innocent woman as well. So right away he is being evil rather than fighting evil. And in the same novel, Dostoevsky also presents two other approaches to injustice in the world, which is just part of our existence. It's just the way life is. One is to completely ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, live, celebrate life for all the pleasures that it can provide. That's in the character of Svidrigailov, this rich pervert guy who sleeps with young girls, and
He's the guy that wants to marry his sister, right? Is that him?
yes,
Yeah.
Raskolnikov's sister,
Yeah,
not his
Raskolnikov.
sister.
No,
Yes.
not his own sister. No.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So that's another way of dealing with the woes of the world, which are always there and are still true. And the third model is that of Sonia Marmeladova, which is a young woman who was kind of forced to become a prostitute to save her starving younger children, who chooses,
Her
this
siblings.
horrible lifestyle. Sorry?
Yeah, her siblings, right? She didn't
Sorry?
have. I think she was doing it to save her
Half
siblings.
sibling.
Yeah, her
Yes,
half
half.
siblings. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So she's keenly aware. She's not oblivious to the horrors of both her situation in the world, being as unfair as it is. But she chooses to only pay a personal price. She chooses not to try to extract, either safety or pleasure or vengeance from anybody other than herself. So this is a model of martyrdom, right? This is a model of
Yeah.
self-sacrifice that is completely separate from any kind of violence or aggression. And I think the wisdom of that, is really profound. That if you pick up arms, no matter what the cause is, you run the risk of becoming a weapon yourself, as are all people who participate in the military and the war. And like I said, like I pray for my friends and my dear cousin who are in the front, but I, more than anything, I wish for them to come home whole and to find peace, and to find de-radicalization, and to find distance from everything that they had to get into to become weapons. So I think fighting evil is a very fraught thing. Evil is tricky.
So you basically agree with me, right? That we should stop celebrating it. That we should stop celebrating violence for the good cause.
I don't know anything about shoulds, thank God I don't need to advise on policy. I just see what I see, and I can report what I see, and I can write about it. And for example, I can advocate for veterans, and I can advocate for care for people who return from zones of conflict. And even people in my field who look at a lot of these videos or materials, like even incel forums. I know a researcher who had to give up the whole thing of researching incels because the misogyny was too much. It just was too much to be with, right? So I think engagement with violence, even as a constant observer, is very dangerous. And for myself, I don't know anything about should for other people, but for myself, I try. For example, I never watch. My friends know this about me. I never watch shows or movies that have violence. I have to reduce the exposure to violence as much as I can because I get enough of it through my work.
Do you think that there is more? Okay, I think that. I think that there is more justification for violence, even if it's against bystanders. Basically, I don't condone it. I don't think it's good, but I understand it more, and I feel like I understand it more when basically the person has no other option and no way of making other people aware of their problems. So I mean, one thing I see with incels is that basically the public really only cares when it's about misogyny or another incel attack, terrorist attack, or some guy just shooting up people. So, and then basically at this point, that's basically the only way they can get some public, and most people are not that radicalized in the incel community. They're not at all in favor of violence. So, and even from them, like a small portion, I mean, like only I think 10% of the users in incel forums are responsible for over 90% of misogynist posts on there. So even within the incel community, there is very few people that are really misogynist. But this is basically almost the last resort to get some attention from the public, is to be misogynist, because that's the only thing basically society seems to care about.
I think it's an arms race. I think there's never enough. Like somebody asked Rockefeller, who was the first ever millionaire and the richest person on earth at that time. They asked him how much money is enough, and his answer was just a little bit more. So I think there's never enough attention. Like, how much attention do you need? There's no good stopping point. And I think, if all we want in the society today, and it may be all we want, right, with the social media, is attention, then of course, inevitably, violence is in our future, because it's a salient event. Like I said, it's a very psychologically salient thing that we as human beings react to biologically, right? People faint at the sight of blood because it's a biological mechanism. Like it's a very important thing that your body responds to in a very physical way, right? So if attention is the only thing we care about, then there's going to be violence.
Wait, but if you have a problem, if you are suffering, then you need attention. I'm not talking about attention as in, look at me, I need some attention. I'm thinking about attention in the sense of help. I need help, right? And so, I mean, just a really extreme example. Let's say you have been kidnapped, right? And your kidnapper has children, and at some point you get a chance of basically taking his children hostage in order to force him to let you go, right? I mean, I think that you're traumatizing these children and even maybe harming them in that moment. Is that a justified act? Is that okay to do? The children didn't do anything to you, right? It's not their fault. But somehow,
I think it's not a fair parallel. I think incels in particular are not in any imminent danger of anything, right? So they're not kidnapped, they're not held hostage, they're not abused at the point when they're incels anyway. It is true that a lot of them are suffering. It is true. However, in my data, I asked them whether they have looked for counseling, and vast majority haven't. And then the ones who have found it unhelpful, and so they gave up even on that. So if you're suffering, there are many things you can do. One is to spread the suffering around so other people know exactly how much you hurt, right? That's kind of what little kids do, right? You push me while I push you, so you know what it's like. But there are other things. First and foremost is to get help. And for example, these ideas about lookism, and
wait,
I've interacted with.
before we get there, I mean, suicide is pretty big one, right? I mean, suicide is really, 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 suicidal ideations is really high among incels, and also being bullied is a pretty high predictor of inceldom, right? So there is and then when we look at autism, something like autism, that's just basically, I believe in a society where society is responsible for its diseases and its issues. So and at the same time, if I feel like society is not only not helping, it's actually actively bullying these people to a certain extent.
Well, so if you're autistic, you're a lot more likely to get bullied, right? Because you can't they have weird quirks. People with autism, they don't behave normally, meaning like most other kids. So other kids, especially at a certain age, they can be very cruel toward those who are not like everybody else. That's why in middle school everybody needs to wear the same exact thing to not stand out, right? So there's there is a cause and effect question of, what came first, and very likely, those incels who have something on the spectrum of autism, that explains their bullying experience, as well as probably their inability to establish relationships.
Sure,
Right?
sure. But that's basically something that society does to them, right? That's like the kidnapping in my analogy.
I mean, it's just
And it could
their
end up
lot.
with
Like
death.
we all are born like not many of us are Angelina Jolie's, born
Sure.
to Oscar-winning fathers with the beauty and the talent, right? So we all come with challenges. This is their challenge. However, not many of us take that challenge as a justification to then hurt others. And I can give you examples, countless examples of people with much greater challenges than having autism and having been bullied, who turned that into either a normal life or a life of giving and service and kindness to others.
I
So it's
agree.
a choice. It's a
Do you think,
choice
if you
that
think it's a
everybody
choice,
has of what to do with the challenges that they are given by God or universe or
do,
chance,
do you think that if you think it's a choice, do you think that they were given that choice, and basically if somebody would ask them, hey, do
I
you want to
think we
turn,
all have a
wait
choice.
wait
Maybe
wait wait
not when
wait
they're a
wait
little
wait wait
kid. I'm
wait
not
wait
talking about
wait
kids.
wait I have
Incels
to
are
finish this. I have to finish
okay.
this. If somebody would have asked them, hey, do you want to turn your life around and get better, or do you want to keep your miserable life and with a certain likelihood commit suicide at the end, do you think they would just say, no, I'm good?
That's not
That's
the
what a
choice.
choice is, right?
That's not the no. That's a choice. It's not the choice I'm talking about.
Which choice are you talking about?
I'm talking about the choice of indulging your feelings of hurt by finding fault with somebody, usually not the person who's responsible for any of this hurt, and directing those feelings into aggression toward them, whether it's verbal aggression or physical aggression. That's the choice.
Do you think you
We
can
all have
control that?
hurts, okay? You're
Mm-hmm.
sitting in front of me. I'm sure that you have experienced things that are difficult. And I have experienced, and my kids, as much as I want to shelter them from it, have experienced things that are difficult, right? The choice is, once you're sitting with that feeling of hurt or grievance or inadequacy or feelings of rejection, which we, again, all have been rejected at one point. I mean, I don't know about Angelina Jolie. I know I have a bunch, right? Do I then decide to take that into the direction of aggression and violence? Or do I decide the buck stops here and I'm just gonna kind of deal with it, sit with it, breathe through it, whatever? Or do I decide, maybe I can help somebody who's feeling like me?
And do you
Maybe I
think,
can
and you,
direct this into a helpful
okay,
behavior. Three different choices.
all of the positive things you just said, they said, no, I'm not gonna do that. And all of the negative things you said, they said, yeah, I'm gonna do that. Is that the way you think it
I
happened?
don't know. I mean, I
I mean,
don't
that's
know.
what you're saying, right?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm
No.
saying everybody has that choice. I'm saying everybody has that choice every single day.
But if they
And
stay
and
there,
like just like with radicalization, because you made a certain choice yesterday doesn't mean that's your destiny. Doesn't mean now you're radicalized or whatever. You face that same choice every
no,
day,
I agree.
and
They can change. They
you
can turn
can
things
be
around. Yeah, I
what?
agree. I agree. They can turn things around. They can. I'm not saying that they can't do anything about it. I'm just saying that it's not a choice. It's.
How is it not a? Why is it not a choice?
I
What's
mean,
preventing them
I mean,
from?
depression, suicidal ideations, anxiety is not something. I mean, you're a psychologist. I mean, I shouldn't have
No, mental
to
illness
tell you
is
that.
not a choice.
Yeah, that's like, and basically like 90% of them suffer from that, right? And
Yeah, but
and
I think that they are aware of treatments. We have pharmaceutical treatments, we have therapeutic treatments, we have individual modalities, we have group modalities, we have virtual modalities. All of these things are out there. It takes, I bet you, if I search right now on Google, pages and pages will come up for any one of these things,
I mean,
right?
yeah, we have the same
So
thing for drinking, right? We also have millions of prevention programs, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't look at a person that is like drinking themselves to death. I wouldn't look at them and be like, it's a choice. You could choose to be otherwise, right? I would never say that. That would be
I'm not
absurd.
talking about depression as such or drinking as such. I'm talking about somebody who takes that depression and instead of acting toward ameliorating it, they decide to act in an aggressive way. That's what you were asking me about, right? So I mean, depression is depression, and anxiety is anxiety, and autism is autism, and all those things are not a choice. It's an illness, and we have treatments for it. But you can choose whether you
Okay,
instead of looking for treatment, look for ways to aggress about it.
just to remind you how we got here. So we got here because I said that I feel like society is really doing something bad to them. So basically the kidnapping analogy. So I have certain amount of understanding for incels being misogynistic or provocative or hateful towards other people in order to get the attention that they get. In the same way, I have some amount of understanding for a kidnapping victim that then take hostage the children of their kidnapper, which have nothing to do with the kidnapper himself.
I have so much understanding for even the worst terrorists. I have a chapter on Osama bin Laden that writing it, I feel like I really understand how he progressed through every single step. But understanding is not the same as excusing. I have a lot of understanding and empathy
What
for
is the
people
difference
who
between
resort to violence.
can you explain the difference?
Excusing meaning, well, if you did it, that means that was your only choice. And so, okay, it's not okay. It wasn't the only choice. And many people in the same situation do different things. And you can suffer from depression, and millions of people do. But out of all the people who suffer from depression, the percentage of people who then pick up a gun or start spewing really hateful rhetoric toward women online is minuscule, which means that in over 99% of the times when a person is suffering from crippled depression, they are capable of not doing these things. It's not a symptom of depression
Is
to be
it
misogynistic.
is it
It's not a symptom of anxiety or
I'm not
autism
saying it is.
to be
It isn't.
violent.
It isn't. It's society that pushes them to be so. It's not a symptom per default. It's like society is basically ignoring them completely, only until they are becoming misogynistic or until they're becoming provocative. Until otherwise they're completely ignoring it. Basically, in every paper that you read, it starts with terrorism, misogyny. That's basically every paper. That's how you get the attention of the public. That's how you get people talking about it. And otherwise, basically, it doesn't.
No, you're just
Nobody
reading the
cares.
wrong paper. I mean, you're just reading a one kind of paper. If
Wait,
you look
I read
at
your paper. Your paper started with
well,
that.
I am a researcher of terrorism. Of course, my
Yeah.
papers are
Okay.
going to talk
That's yeah.
about that.
True. That's true.
Like it's
Yeah,
a very
that's true.
selective,
But
bunch of
yeah,
papers.
that's true.
But I
But
think okay.
wait. Would you excuse?
Listen.
Would you
I'm going
excuse?
to I'm going to agree with you on one thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this society, America. I don't know if you're in the U.S. or not,
I'm in
but
Europe. I'm Germany.
you're in Europe. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. The U.S. is atrocious about social safety net. It's non-existent. You need to be healthy and you need to be productive, or else you're shit out of luck. Okay, and we are so far behind on the needs of the population, which this generation of young people that are in colleges now, their rates of mental health illness are skyrocketing, but the availability of treatment and viable treatment for them is lagging far behind. So I'll give you that. But I am not willing to go as far as to say that the society is doing any, it to them. I believe in a person's agency. Everybody has free will. Even a kidnapping victim still has some agency.
So
And
is it okay? Is it
certainly,
excusable? Would you excuse that behavior? Would you excuse that behavior of the kidnapping
what
victim?
does it matter what I mean, the
Because
court
you
would
said
probably
you made that.
the
No,
court
wait.
would probably excuse that behavior.
You said it's important to it's okay to understand, but it's not okay to excuse. So now, since we're already in agreement probably that it's understandable. I don't really know what you mean by excuse, but then you translated it to it's okay, basically saying okay.
I talked
Morally,
about terrorists. I mean, so I don't like to talk about like really vague. I don't know about that kidnapping. If you give me, a concrete case that I know about, I can tell you. But
It's a
in
hypothetical.
terms of Osama bin Laden, no, it's not okay.
No, no, no.
In
That's
terms of Zawahiri, it's not okay. In
is it
terms of
okay for that
Tim McVeigh,
for
what?
default per default, like would you morally be okay with a kidnapping victim taking the children of his kidnapper hostage in order to get free?
I'm not okay with harming people. I think, you know, taking hostage is a different thing, and we need to talk
You
about
don't have to
particulars
answer about
on
it.
what it entails. Like, I mean, it's just too hypothetical to
If
really make.
you can just say I don't want to answer it. That's all right.
No, I can't, because you don't give me enough information, and it's all in your head. So you have it's like guess a number, and I say 3, and you say wrong.
No, I
Because I
never
don't know.
said wrong. I never said wrong. I never said right. I just asked your opinion. There is no wrong and right.
You're
Answer about
asking
it.
my opinion about a non-existent situation, and I
It's
can't,
called a
have one.
hypothetical. Yeah, it's called a hypothetical. It's a moral dilemma, and I agree that it's a dilemma. I'm not saying it's an easy question. Why don't you know? Why don't you know the answer? I'm not saying that. It's all right if you don't know the answer, but it's not an impossible task. It's not an impossible question to answer, right?
I can only tell you for myself. I would like to think, and again, we can all speculate all we want, but the truth is, once we're in a situation like the Ukraine war, like, people end up acting the way they end up acting, and not the way they thought they would have acted. So, I would want to think that, I would not harm even people who were harming me, let alone their children. But if I were in this, who knows? The thing about psychology is, we know very well over the past 80 years of research that people suck about predicting their own reactions and actions. So if I ask you what's going to make you happy or what's going to make you miserable, you can, tell me all kinds of things. But in real life, it turns out it's all pretty much wrong. We're really bad about forecasting ourselves in the future. So I can only hope, and I tell my kids, the best we can do is kind of make some decisions for ourselves that will be easy to go back to when the situation is upon you with all the complexity. And so for me, violence is a decision that, like, I do not believe that violence is okay. Period.
Okay, can I?
You know.
Yeah, we don't have
So
to.
I hope that I would be able to go back to that in a situation where it's complicated and there's pressure and there's stress and there's fear and all of that.
I feel like the reason why you have difficulties also answering that is because the moment something becomes understandable. I mean, there was another case that's a real case where basically 3 people were stranded and they had to eat one of them. I don't know if you're aware of this case. It's a really, really old case.
There's a bunch of these cases.
Yeah, okay. I just know one. I think it's in the late 1800s or something like that. And basically, they have been tried for murder, but they got like a minimum, just like a sentence that was not really a sentence, because like everybody was like, I get it. I would probably eat my fellow comrade as well, because just survival is just something like that. And I feel like many, like the moment every human being, I think every healthy human being can imagine that they would do the worst things in a situation where they're fearing for their life. And I think that a person that is close to being suicidal and is really like having suicidal ideations and suffering really bad mentally, and also even under big pain, would do the craziest things, and we would never blame them. I mean, who would blame a person that is being tortured for doing anything, right? So,
I mean, it's true when you say that, but however, it's true that sometimes people do these horrible things, but sometimes people resist doing even, little bad things. And we have a lot of examples of that. There's
we
a
can, but
Catholic priest who refused to stop ministering to people in Auschwitz despite being repeatedly beaten and spat on, and they drowned him in excrement, and he just refused to do the normative thing, which is to go along with the Nazi guards. We have so many cases of people refusing to do what you say a normal human being, like they rise above that.
Sure, but we
And
never
we
take.
we can aspire to that, as opposed to reminding ourselves that, oh, it's all okay, because after all, everybody's capable of horrible things, but everybody's also capable of really good things, and it
Sure,
depends on if you think about it and arrive at a place where, you know, this is your red line, it makes it a little more likely than when the push comes to shove that you're going to do the right thing and not the wrong thing.
Not being strong enough is not a moral rule that you can break, right? So not being strong enough
No,
for
not
something
everybody
is
can
not
do it.
something
These
that
are
you know. You
individual
can never
cases, but
say
also
you can never
beating
say
others.
you're so horrible person because you've not resisted the torture and you've not resisted. I mean,
No, I couldn't say
it
that. I
makes no
could only
sense.
hope.
Yeah.
And like I said, you know, I can only say it for myself, and I can only hope that I do it because I am fully aware that, you know, the Milgram experiment,
Mhm.
you're aware,
Yeah, I'm
like
aware of that.
where
Yeah.
people were kind of gently pushed down this path of delivering progressively stronger shocks all the way to the deadly shock, and the person, for all they knew, died. And 66% of all participants, and it's been replicated and replicated, go all the way to the end, killing an innocent person for no good reason at all. They were paid like $3 for this
Wait, but
experiment.
that has nothing to do with our
No,
issue.
it does, because
Oh.
before Milgram carried out the experiment, he asked a bunch of people, how many people do you think would do this? He asked psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychology students.
Yeah.
And their consensus was that less than 1%, because they estimated that is the population of psychopaths in
Mhm.
the general population. And it turns out they were vastly wrong. These were psychology professionals.
Mhm.
So I'm saying that our ideas of what we might do, or what an average person might do, are completely
Yeah,
mistaken.
they were crumbling under social torture, basically. So
No, there
yeah,
was no
yeah,
torture. There
yeah.
was
That's
no torture.
yeah. Wait. Let me explain to you. The reason that's not, it's not torture in that sense, but it is the amount of uh, stress it put on them to have an authority figure tell them do this, and they were not able to resist that authority figure. They were
Three
not able
times. The
to.
experimenter had to cajole them 3 times, and they had to do it with only specific phrases. And the phrases were, the experiment requires you to go on, you must go on, please continue. That's it. And if you are ready to say that that's psychological torture
What
that
is
justifies killing a human being, then I
No, no,
think,
no.
you
I'm
know,
not saying
we're
it's.
done.
No. Wait, we're done. What did you say?
I think if you're willing to color that as a psychological torture that justifies killing an innocent human being, then I think we don't have enough common ground to have a discussion.
So you would be ready to end this conversation if I would think that? Is that what you say?
I think we don't have. I mean, to have a conversation, we need to have some like we agree that Hitler is a bad person. You
Really?
know,
Okay.
if we don't agree that it's not a torture for somebody to tell you, please go on, the experiment requires you to go on, then I don't know how to have a conversation.
What is your definition of torture? If you pinch someone really lightly in order to inflict pain on them, isn't that by definition torture? If you
No,
No, what is torture? What is your definition of torture?
I don't have a definition of torture, but I sure hope that torture is a lot more than pinching somebody.
Sounds like this conversation is torture to you.
Well,
No.
yeah, I think, you know, there is a way to kind of absurdize anything, and I think we're headed in that direction. And I have teenage children, and I don't enjoy that. you know, getting to the cynicism and absurdity is not productive.
It's not
Time for
cynicism, it's
me.
not absurdity, it is being precise. It is, if you are being precise, if you are being abstract enough, you can think about things more clearly. That's what it is. It's not about a fun game or anything, but just by definition, you have the
Yeah.
definition of torture is inflicting pain on somebody, right? In order for that pain, it's not for any other cause. There is no cause behind it. So if I'm punching somebody, if I'm shoving somebody, for example, in
Yeah, that's
order
not
for
torture.
them, that's not torture, because my goal was to do something else. My goal was not the pain. My goal was to maybe move them away or get something else from them, right? So, but torture.
So the definition of torture, I just looked it up. It's
Mhm,
severe pain or severe suffering. And,
mhm.
you know,
Okay, it's
pinching
severe, isn't it?
somebody,
In it. Okay, I see.
yeah,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
pinching somebody is really not.
Okay. Oh wait, my screen died. Um, do you have to go soon?
I do. I thought we would be done by um
Do you have time
By
for
3:30?
one last
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Okay, but then you have to give me 2 minutes to fix my camera. Sorry, guys. We're back. Oh, all right. Yeah, okay, last topic. I want to ask you what you think about the I just want to ask you now as a private person, not as a researcher. What do you think about the foundations of the black pill ideology? Stuff like 80-20 rule or monogamy. I mean, just monogamy changing with the last 2 generations, making it such that not everybody is getting married, just like maybe 100 years ago. Do you ever think about these? Yeah, these
I think
things.
there's some validity, some validity. You know, obviously attractive people have better choices and better salaries for that matter. Um, I don't know the 80-20, you know, that anybody did any kind of rigorous research to substantiate those numbers. It sounds like something they casually use in a conversation and just kind of stuck. I haven't seen anything to support that particular, you know, proportion. Um, I think that in all species, almost all species, there is a proportion of males who never get a partner. And I think in human history, there was a bunch of males who always were left out of even the monogamy market, who ended up becoming monks or soldiers, um, or like, you know, servers of the church. Um, and it's just that in today's Western society, there's such a status association with having a partner that that particular direction may seem like a losing direction, um, more so than it was before. I mean, it was prestigious to become a monk. It was prestigious to become a soldier. You brought honor to your family. You know, families prepared their youngest sons for something like that because there wasn't enough land for all the sons, and without land, you couldn't marry because you needed to have a livelihood. Um, and I think that it's probably harder to find a partner today than before because we're not as connected socially as we were before. Ironically, even though the social media connects us, you know, people are lonelier. We have data about it. In America, especially, you know, people are extremely lonely. We're separated by screens and by, you know, car rides and by insane work schedules. Um, and of course, that's going to result in some people feeling it more acutely than others. Um, and so I can understand the, you know, the situation, the predicament that results in some men identifying as incels. Um, I don't feel that women are to blame for any of it. You know, I don't understand, you know, how you go from that to this. You know, if anything, you know, men tend to be non-monogamous more than women. So women tend to pick a partner and want to pick a partner and stick with them, as opposed to men who tend to want to have more than one partner. So if there's anybody to blame for the scarcity of available women, it's not women.
Yeah, actually, it would be better if women were less monogamous. by that logic, it would be better if they would be less monogamous, because
Right.
then it would be not only the 20% that would get them. I mean, I don't really believe in the 20% at all, but I think that's because we are still in a pretty monogamous society. I mean, we have like serial monogamy. Most people still want to be in a monogamous relationship, and yeah, but so you do agree that that no matter what we do, so the idea is basically go to the gym, educate yourself, get a higher salary, and blah blah blah, and all of these things, and then you're gonna stop being an incel. But according to what we are basically now talking about, or become a better communicator, become a nicer person, more charismatic, more, I don't know, be more be more likable for women. That's basically the prescription that society is giving to incels generally. But you are basically saying is that in the way our society is currently, in the direction society is currently going to, there will always be a percentage of men who will be left out, just like in the times before we had the strict monogamy where everybody was getting married. So basically, even if you get better, you just kick out somebody else basically out of this hierarchy, right?
I mean, right. So if there is 100 men and 100 women, and that's the population of humans, and women tend to want to be monogamous, but out of the 100 men, some amount, 30, will want to have more than one woman at all times, right? That leaves some men who will never get a single woman if women want to be monogamous. You understand how the math works?
Yes.
It's very simple. It's just math, right?
Yes.
And the preferences that are built into women and men by millennia of evolution.
Yes.
So I think it's hard. I think, listen, I'm a divorced single woman. It's freaking hard. I don't think I'm an incel. And I don't think there's anything, wrong with my communication
Damn,
skills.
we should have talked about femcells. I forgot to.
Yeah, I'm not though. So I'm just like, it's a hard time to be alive in, where we're in this wild west of the internet. The social bonds are kind of straining and breaking all over the place. Where do you meet people? These in Europe it's easier. In America, there are no third places. You have to spend like exorbitant amounts of money going to places you might not enjoy, like bars or clubs.
You're gonna attract a lot of hatred if you continue to talk now, because
why?
because of reasons. You are, so basically my community to 90% is probably incels, and I understand you, I hear you, but we're talking about we have a lot of, I mean, if 90% are incels, you know the stats about incels, we're talking about people with a very high likelihood of having very severe problems from that. So your issues, I understand them, but it will not really, I mean, I also think that it's kind of not good to talk about them. You see what I mean?
I'm not trying to talk about my issues. I'm trying to illustrate the infrastructure for meeting and connecting with people is compromised. And I'm saying that it's compromised for everybody. So I'm not trying, I mean, I don't need you to talk about my issues.
But
really
there is a difference. You could do something about it, right? And we agree that you are not statistically just that it is statistically for some people impossible to get better, or so your problem is solvable.
Why is it statistically impossible? That's bullshit.
Because you're just kicking out somebody else then for that person. You just agreed to that. You just made the simple math, right? You just said, okay.
Well, I mean, no, for a particular person, statistically, there's a subsection of men that are going to be without partners. But for any particular person, there's no statistical impossibility.
But it's just like saying that everybody can get rich. It's just like the same thing. Not everybody can get rich. Not at the same time.
Anybody.
Not at the same time.
You're mixing up, you're mixing up things.
Tell me.
I'm not saying everybody can get a girlfriend. I'm saying anybody, any one person doesn't have an impossibility of getting a girlfriend. There's a motivational speaker who was born without arms or legs. Yeah. He's married with 3 children. If he can get a girlfriend, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's not good that you're saying that, because that's you just admitted that there will always be some guy who's gonna not be in a relationship, or who's not gonna get laid. He's always gonna be single his whole life, right? That's what we said before. There was so
No, I didn't
telling
say
him
about the whole
it's
life. I'm
cruel.
saying
It's
at any
cruel.
given time,
No,
at
we
any
know
given
that
time, there's going to be
it's his whole
there's
life.
going to
We
be a
know.
group of men who are not going to have a partner.
We know that it's his whole life, right? We
No,
know
we
that.
don't.
We know
No,
that
we
from
don't.
we know
No,
that.
we don't. And
We
I know
do.
personally some people who were very influential in the incel movement
It can
who
be a
have
very
since
small
gotten
percentage.
girlfriends that they moved
Uh-huh.
in with.
Okay, then it's case closed, right? No, it's not case
No, but you
closed.
were
There was
making it sound like it was case closed, and I'm saying it's very much open.
you just admitted that in every species you have like 30 to 40% that is
I didn't
continuing
say anything about percent. I didn't say anything about percent.
Okay, but there is a certain percent. I think the percentage is really low. Okay, I think it's like maybe it's probably pretty low, but there is a small percentage, very small percentage, who's never going to get laid because no matter what they individually do, they're gonna kick somebody else out, and that person is just like there is always going to be someone who's going to be poor for the rest of their life, right? Because our current system is just designed that way.
You're
That
mixing a whole bunch of things together. Being at any given time, being poor doesn't mean that you're going to be poor for the rest of your life. At any given time, not having had a partner up until that point doesn't mean that you're going to stay that way. People are serious monogamists, right? So, you're not single now, you will be, single maybe at some time later, and vice versa. If you're single now, you may be together with somebody
okay,
sometime
so
later.
then I completely misunderstood you because I thought you said that there is in every species there is a certain amount of men that never get married and never produce and never get into a relationship. I thought that's what you said before.
In species other than humans, they don't get married, right? But in a lot of
And don't
species,
reproduce.
there's certain proportion of males who never become partnered ever. In
Yes.
humans, we had it codified in the Western civilization up until some time ago,
Yes.
where we kind of put these people in a pigeonhole where if you're a monk, that's it,
Yeah.
If you're a soldier, I mean, you can probably, I don't know, have a romance at some or something, but you're never going to get married. That's it. That was the deal. That deal is kind of, I mean, you can probably still become a monk, but for most, men, that's not an option that's as much on the table as it was a while ago. So we're in this shifting paradigm right now where, people feel bad that they're not in a relationship, where before they would feel, happy about, this future that they would have with the church or whatever. But that's not to say that
Wait.
this is their destiny. Being a monk is a destiny.
So you don't believe that there is a certain percent of men who will always there will always be a certain percentage of men who will never get into a relationship ever in their whole lifetime. Do you believe that, or you don't believe that?
I don't know about a whole lifetime. I really don't. I mean,
but that was the thing that we talked about when we said about other species, right? That's what you were saying, right?
Yeah, but humans are not other species.
It's not like the other species were having affairs, but you took the parallel of species to
and
in order.
Wait, so,
we didn't just talk about other species just randomly. You said
and
that,
again, I told you
yeah.
that in the Western civilization we had a parallel model where we pigeonholed some men into careers that prevented them from competing in the meat market. But that has changed. We don't have that model as a viable one anymore, right? So even in other species, so you have, for example, an alpha male gorilla or ape of some sort that dominates females and partners with them, and other males don't even go through puberty. They remain in the juvenile state.
Yeah.
Does that mean they're going to remain that way forever? Not at all, because the alpha males, they get into a lot of fights, which injures them, and sometimes it kills them.
Yep.
B, testosterone, which is what makes them alpha male. That's what grows hair and makes them big and their muscles bulky.
Yeah.
It's very expensive for the body. It wears out your heart muscle, which is why men have heart attacks more than women. So they die younger. And the juvenile males actually live longer.
Okay, I get it.
And they can go through puberty when the alpha male steps down, is kicked down, is killed,
and is being replaced by the new alpha male. And then
they become alpha males. Or there's another possibility, which is they become beta males who secretly sleep with the women, with the females. And unlike the alpha male, they're nice to them and they help
Yeah.
with the babies and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of possibilities for the not
Okay,
alpha
but
males.
I'm pretty sure that in animals, I'm pretty sure that the sexual selection goes that only a few small amount, a small percentage of men reproduce, and all the other ones don't reproduce. And
So you have to look that up again. So
Mhm.
I mean, it's true that alpha males out reproduce other individuals.
Mhm.
However, it's not for the rest. Alpha males get done being alpha males, and then the
Mhm.
next alpha male kills all of their offspring. That's the first thing they do, to put the females in the estrus so they can
Mhm.
impregnate them. So they have a chance to have their own offspring. And there is this, a sizable proportion of illegitimate, babies fathered by beta males.
I mean, I'm not saying that this is the case for humans. I'm saying that, for example, because of monogamy, that's not the case for humans, right? Because we don't live in a society where most women want to be with one alpha male that has 10 girlfriends, right? We live in a
Yeah.
society where most women want one husband and want to be in a monogamous relationship, and at the same time, the ones that are polygamous, that are not in a committed monogamous relationship, might be with a guy that has a lot of women, but are also sleeping around with a lot of men. So there's really no problem there either, right? So we don't have that dynamic where we get in the ape situation with the alpha male ape that has a harem and the rest that are not getting
I don't
anything.
know. I mean, I think we sometimes do in some societies more than in others, but anyway, there are
Okay,
some societies where males keep harems.
sure, true. Uh,
I have to go.
I know. Thank you for your time, Sophia. It was an interesting talk. If you want to have, you can have the last words.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. Sorry if I upset any of your listeners. I didn't intend it. And I wish all of you guys peace and ease of life and happiness.
Thank you, Sophia. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye. That was interesting. Okay, people, I'll be here for another few minutes. If you guys have questions. She confirms Blackpill, it's over. Toppy, don't do that, man. Wheeling says Sophia brutally blackpills the audience. JDS says, damn, she drops the blackpill. Guys, it's over. Yeah, you can see that even yeah, I have to fight against the black pill from unexpected places. That's why monogamy was invented, to stop hypergamy and counteract Briffault's law. I don't know Briffault's law. What is Briffault's law? Being an incel is not a crime against humanity. No, it isn't. Sorry for ranting. No worries, man. Just two remarks. Okay. Did that go as you expected? Kind of yes and kind of no. I feel like I was really, I don't know, it felt a little disorganized at first, and I had planned it really in a really organized way. I had my topics were really, I mean, I don't really plan these things like rigorously, but I have like these topics that I want to talk about and I just write them down one by one. And I feel like they were in my head, they were really separate, but her answers were always touching on the topics that I already had in mind, that I was going to bring up. And that really confused me from time to time, because I always thought, maybe that's a good time to talk about right now. And yeah, I got a little bit into the meta thinking about what how the conversation should go. I feel like it was better towards the end. And also at the beginning, I was not so sure. I felt like sometimes she was not directly answering my question, but it didn't feel like she was obfuscating, so I let her do it. But towards the end, I think also with since I was also looking at time and I didn't want to, I had so much other things that I want to talk about with her, so I had to cut her off a few times. Yes, being poor doesn't mean you have to stay poor, but it's a strong indicator for remaining poor. I think it's the same for being a virgin. It's a very strong indicator for remaining one. Okay, so the idea about poor and the parallel I drew there was basically the following. So she basically was kind of blackpilled, right? She was saying, at least at first, she was saying a certain percentage of men will probably stay single always and have always been basically staying single. Monks and soldiers, and now in today's society they don't really have their place, and with monogamy breaking up they're also becoming more, and yeah. But that means that basically there will all, no matter how hard everybody tries, there will always still be a certain amount of people. I don't believe in this, by the way, so I was not arguing from that perspective. I don't believe in that, but because of other reasons. I think that that on per default that's how it is. That's the way she tells it. Per default that's how it is. But there's other factors that make it that it's not like that. But she thinks it's like that. And if she thinks it's like that, it doesn't make sense to me that she says that it's a choice to become an incel, because the moment that you decide to not be an incel anymore and, I don't know, improve yourself to become, I don't know, more happy and have less psychological issues and looks max and blah, 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 in that moment, you're basically kicking out somebody else and making them be alone forever, right? And it's like, how can you then tell people to improve? That didn't make sense for me. So, and it's the same with getting rich. So if you earn more money, then you, by definition, we can't all be millionaires. The moment we are all millionaires, being a millionaire doesn't make any sense anymore. There is no more. Then we have to be billionaires in order to be millionaires, right? Her views on violence and sensitivity, it was interesting to me. Yeah, I think it was really, really, really interesting, especially the talk about heroism and martyrdom, and yeah, I felt like there was a lot of very interesting topics there. I think she was quite surprised on how the conversation went, because she was not expecting us to talk so much about definition. I mean, usually the way these podcasts work with experts, with academics, is that they basically just talk about what's already written in their paper. So it's basically just an audio version of their papers and their research. And I don't want to do that. That's not really that interesting to me. I mean, we can talk about it in a few sentences, but I'm way more interested in the biases that they have, in what they think about it. I mean, I want to get to know the person that does the research. That's a big part of it. And also, I want to also shape the research to the extent that, I mean, there was the saying, I don't know who said it, but science without philosophy without science is empty, and science without philosophy is blind. And basically, I think the researchers need also guidance from the public on moral questions, on definitions, on if it makes sense, the questions that they ask, if they make sense. And yeah, I don't know. That's why I invite these experts, not for them to just talk about their papers and tell me what's in them. We can read them. We should read them. We shouldn't just get this short version on. And also, I'm also interested in understanding more on how this research is being done. So I like to also, and I'm sure that I could have just looked up the statistical significance and all of this stuff, and I have some rudimentary knowledge about it, but I think it's way more fun to just ask it on stream because I'm sure that many people don't really know about it. So why not just learn with everybody? Lots of MGTOWs would talk about excess male population that affect dating, for example, baby boomers. Yeah, I mean, this excess male population, I think, doesn't really exist because most people, I mean, it exists, but to a very, very small percentage. I think it's a very, very, very small percentage that is affected by that. Because most people still want monogamy. I mean, most women, like a very, very overwhelming majority of women want to be in a monogamous relationship. So a harem doesn't cut it for them. Okay, I'm not going to read that. I think you did well as a thanks, man. I appreciate it. Okay. If there is no more questions, I'm going to finish the stream. Yeah, I want to talk to... I'm not sure yet. I got recommended a lot of Thinking Ape videos. I really want to check his channel out. I was aware of his channel, but I never thought that it was really relevant to the topic that I'm covering right now. And yeah, I'm gonna check all of the videos out that I got suggested, and maybe, who knows, maybe we can already make it happen next week, if he also is interested, of course. And if not, I'm gonna get somebody else. Or maybe I just take a break, or I do a community stream. Something's gonna happen. Watch Goatis Savage, best Blackpill nature reality YouTuber. Okay. I'm gonna check it out. Thanks. It's not a Connect stream without the 40 minutes of pedantic definition discussion. I really tried my best to not continue to have that discussion. I really, really, really had to force myself to go on because I'm still not satisfied with the answer. What is the... I mean, yeah, actually at the end she gave me a definition that I could work with. But yeah, I will have to think about that. I feel like it's not a... My something tells me that it was not a good answer, but I was not able to think about... I didn't want to think about it at the moment on the fly and give a bad answer. I know you can't read some of my comments for legal reasons. Yeah, I don't... Yeah, I don't really know how to... I don't really haven't really decided on how to deal with some comments. I feel like I don't want to censor anything, and I don't censor anything. I generally don't delete anything, but I also have to draw a line if it's hurtful to other people. Okay, guys, thanks for being here. Join the Discord if you want to talk about this, and or if you have suggestions, you can post things in the suggestion box. It was a really nice stream. Take care. Bye-bye.